Good afternoon and welcome to this panel, which is about AI governance, which is a fancy word for the question of how to regulate AI. That sounds, of course, a bit dull compared to all the fancy things AI can do, but it is hugely important. So it's always said that AI has three ingredients: data, talent, and compute, and I think it has four, and the fourth is regulation. So without regulation, you cannot think this technology. And the big questions are, and you know them, what are the risks? Are we all going to be turned into paperclips soon? How can you balance regulating risk and boosting research and development? And does the current or the new European AI Act meet that expectation? And because this is a research-oriented conference, the question also is what role can universities play in kind of bridging these three things, engineering, society, and politics. And I have a world-class panel here to discuss all this. I have Amelie Heldt. She is the Deputy Head of General Digital Policy Issues at the German Federal Chancellery, working on national, European, and international data and AI policy. Previously, she was a researcher at the Leibniz Institute for Media Research, and her research there focused, among other things, on platform regulation and social media governance. And you correct me if there's anything wrong here.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have Was Gasser. He's Professor of Public Policy, Governance, and Innovation Technology, and he is Dean at the TUM School for Social Science and Technology. His research focuses on the interactions between innovative technologies and society, particularly the social and regulatory implications of AI, augmented and virtual reality, and quantum technologies. And then we have Isa Sonnenfeld. She was the head of Google's News Lab for Europe, Middle East, and Africa from 2015 to 2014. She is a tech leader with more than 15 years of experience and holds degrees in European studies and political management. And last but not least, as we say in Germany, Helmut Krcmar. He has a background in business and computer science and has been professor at TUM since 2002. He led the construction of the new campus for the digital age at TUM in Heilbronn. And we'll talk about that some more, I think. So let's do some level setting and start with talking about risks. So I just want to check here, how much of a doomer are you?
Not that much, I guess. Yeah, no. So you want to pass it on, or should I expand on the matter? No, what we're seeing, or what our perspective on this is that we have many questions to answer now, today. And it's something that we've been doing at a national level since 2018, at a European level. Well, let's say with the start of with the first draft of the EU AI Act, and we are of course participating in the broader discussions on, say, existential risks. But we are very much aware that there are enough questions to answer now.
Was.
Yeah, I would agree. So thank you for already doing the heavy lifting here. Of course, we have to be mindful of longer-term risks, and there are many unknowns, how powerful these technologies will be in the future. But I'm also more worried about the current risks and issues at hand that we already see, whether it's in the form of data bias, privacy risks, security and safety risks. So I think job opportunities and the like. So there are a long list of risk already in front of us. But since you started by saying this is a very German panel, because we start on time, it's also typical that we start with risk, right? And so I would say we should probably also think about the risk of not using the technology to build better societies.
Isa.
So I'm not going to repeat the risks. I would say I'm a radical optimist, to be honest, because I follow the notion of the future is now. So we need to stop trying to predict the future and the risks of the future, but we need to realize that the future is now, and we need to understand, obviously, the risk, but we also need to understand the opportunities we have, because the decisions that we make now will be defining the future. So without always thinking about what could happen in 5-10 years, I think we need to start rolling up our arm sleeves, especially in Europe, and define what kind of future we want to live in conjunction with technology and with the technological developments.
Helmut.
I'm a real worry hawk, because I'm worried that by beginning the debate with risks instead of possible benefits and their downfalls once you get the benefits, we just start on the wrong foot. We start on the wrong foot because we worry about something that is certainly a risk, like living on the planet. A comet could fall on us. That is also a risk, highly unlikely. And if you focus on these risks, at what I call it the AI at the fringes, if it is really getting dangerous, if it's really very biased, which is obviously happening, we forget about the inner middle of where AI technology can be utilized usefully under today's circumstances. And we forget that the major problem that I see in industry is not thinking about the risk, which they do, but is not having enough data, or not having data-savvy people that can actually use the technology, or having IT architectures that don't allow to use all the lovely things that we describe in the many use cases. So to me, it's more important to find out how can we start working on these futures, because that future will not be endured, but we should design it, and I agree with you. If we don't start utilizing that, we also don't learn the pitfalls of actually going there. That doesn't mean that there is not fundamental issues to be solved, but many of the utilizations today are there to be taken. And by starting the debate with what is the outlying risk of bias or all kind of other stuff, let's say in the video area and video capture area, we stop people from thinking, what can I do in my workspace? And that is because I think we need to understand that AI is a general purpose technology. It will be everywhere, but it will not be the same everywhere. So we need people, we need not just talents from university, but everybody in all the companies and administration to understand what in their work environment might be the helpful aspect. And then we can still look whether that helpful aspect, should it be implemented, goes against the regulation, is in reality much more dangerous than you would usually think. And I think many companies are already dealing that they say, well, we need to find out more possible use cases to employ in the middle, not on the fringes, but in the middle.
Okay, let's stop talking about risks and start talking about regulation. In as much as we need a regulation, what would you focus on? What's kind of you talked about kind of immediate short-term things we have to focus on. From where you sit in the Chancellery, kind of what are the three main areas you think we should do something?
So the three main areas we're focusing on are not only on regulation, but if we have to mention or if we're talking about regulation, what we're looking at now, of course, is the implementation of the AI Act. Is the question to what extent it overlaps with other laws in the digital sphere. So a lot of risks that we're discussing at the moment in the context of elections, for instance, is disinformation. Now we also have the Digital Services Act, which actually looks at online harms or harmful content. So what we're also looking at now is to what extent do the AI Act and the DSA work together? We have the same thing when it comes to competition. So really want European companies to have a fair chance at this game. So what do we need? We need fair competition along the AI stack. So we're looking at the DMA, we're looking at other competition laws and how that works together. And then what we are looking at the international level, and it's not really, say, regulation for now, but it's the Global Digital Compact that was decided upon in September, that was adopted in September, and we are now looking at the implementation of that and that what does it mean actually at the national level. something that we're focusing on that is, let's say, more, that is not mentioned often when we talk about AI or when we talk about AI regulation is obviously what Urs also mentioned. What are the risks if companies or if users are not able to actually use AI? So what do they need before that? They need data. And a lot of German companies are not digitalized yet. They don't use their data. They don't see a future in data-driven business models. So we are also right now implementing the Data Act, and we are very much looking at how all these regulations will work together to actually, make things work in Europe.
Do you agree that we should, in particular in Europe, talk much less about the risks and more kind of about adoption, perhaps, kind of that's kind of the scarce good here in Europe, yeah? Or do you when you hear kind of the list of all the new European regulations and other things which have to be implemented and made fit, do you worry that there's kind of too much of it?
So I think in the broadest sense, it's a good thing that we see lots of activities, right? Not only in Europe, but across the world. And I think what I like about it is that there is diversity of approaches to AI governance. And I think it's very important to be clear, regulation is only one tool in the governance toolbox. Governance is broader than regulation. So we see different approaches, right? Singapore and Brazil and Canada and like many countries with their nuances, and sometimes they use more of technical standards or best practices or ethical principles. And Europe has decided we take hard law, right? And have a particular horizontal approach to regulate across different application areas. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not very confident that we actually know as societies where we want to go. What are the societies and the futures we want to build together? I think this is a question much broader than AI. And second, we need to be honest that we are not sure whether the tools we're using right now, including the AI Act, will be actually the best tools that get us to the goals that are still some sort of fuzzy to begin with. And so, in other words, if you're completely honest, we're flying in the dark. We make decisions without knowing what's going to work, nor where we exactly want to go with it. And so what that means, and what I'm most interested in going forward, is how do we ensure regulatory learning or learning in governance? And I think that's the real challenge, right? That while we're implementing now, and that's already a full plate, how can we actually learn from each other? Not only kind of in sandboxes and experiments locally, but also given the diversity of approaches globally from different ecosystems. And I think, frankly, our institutions also internationally, think the UN system or pick your favorite international organization, we are not well positioned to do this sort of learning, because the whole system of international organizations was born in a world where we had clarity on the goal and clarity on the instrument that bring us to that goal. And so we have to rethink and reprogram essentially our institutions and processes and mechanisms of learning across jurisdictions.
We'll come to that later again, but is that, I mean, you no longer work for Google, but how do you see that? I mean, is the criticism that Europe is again over-regulating, over-governing technology before it's actually being adopted seriously? Is that a correct argument?
I mean, I think we all agree that with AI, regulation is absolutely key. It's the impact AI will have on us individually, on workforce, on societies, on democracies, cannot be defined because we simply don't know yet. It's an evolving. It's basically we live in an evolving phase. Which I think also creates uncertainty for many people that are maybe not that close to the topic as we all are. So I think it's clear that we need regulatory frameworks, and I would also absolutely agree with Urs that the frameworks that we now have, they can't keep up the pace with the technology and with the technological development. So we, I think, need to rethink our approach to regulation, and we need to rethink our approach to political frameworks in order to be more flexible and more adaptive to the technological developments. And I also would say that, and maybe even go a bit further and say, with the current situation, especially after this week, politically, it requires a complete radical upgrade to the way we think about democracies and societies in a technological AI era. So when it comes to regulation, I think collaboration is the absolute key on an international level, because technology knows no boundaries. It requires maybe even an entrepreneurial thinking. So when you build a company, when you build a product, you're always in the ideation process. You always change things because the environment is changing. And I think that's an approach that we can learn from. In the political sphere, obviously, it's much harder and much more complex. But I think we are at this pivotal moment where we won't get where we want to be, maybe, with the past mindset, I would say.
I hear you on that, but aren't we in Europe going the other way? I mean, the AI Act is a typical kind of European law, and things are changing, and it's probably already kind of not fit for purpose.
I mean, there are obviously mixed observations how the AI Act is serving the purpose. And especially when we realize that on the technological front, we might not be able to compete in Europe. Yeah. So how do we turn it around and maybe start thinking about, okay, if we are not competing on the technological front, we can compete on the use of AI in a responsible and ethical way. And that's what we need to define as a scientific business policy community to figure out how Europe and how Germany and France and all the other countries can compete, at least on the democratic and societal values, if it's not on the technological front.
Now, Urs said something about flying in blind, I think, or is it a black hole or something. Helmut, so what what role can universities play in this? I mean, you built this campus in Heilbronn, and it's not just a tech campus, I understand. So why? What was the plan?
Well, I mean, there are many things to be commented about the speed, and I think one of the major changes is it's not just volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous as we see the world, but it's also moving very fast. Mm-hmm. And if you observe the numbers of technologies arriving on a quarterly base, which basically change the set of what has been easy to be done and what's difficult, that is an added element, because if you do regulation in an ex-ante regulation way, and you seem to understand what might come along, you need to define terms which are not really very fixed technologically. So it could be that the legal approach on how do you regulate and how do you control for responsibility, for explainability, needs to be done in a different way. And I think that's something one needs to look at. The second comment I would like to make from the point of view of many AI startups, it really depends on how you actually implement regulation. You can implement regulation by what's being meant to be regulated, and that way come along with technology advances along the way, or you can play it very precisely, the German way, by the book, and gray is already black. And I think that's the biggest fear that I hear in young companies and in companies, that they will try to be responsible, unbiased, and look at privacy issues and all of that, but they're not quite sure whether it couldn't be done much better. Okay? So I think we need to understand that, right, it's not just the law as it's written, but also how it's actually implemented in those cases where it needs to be interpreted. Now for us, for the digital age in Heilbronn meant to prepare for a world where the business world and the tech world are intertwined, not just talking about each other. because that's exactly what in that regulatory affair is an issue. You look for business utilization or public utilization or for AI for good utilization, and it really is an intertwining between what's the purpose of the tool and what is the AI tool behind it. And that's why we try to build it up, and interestingly enough, TU Munich called AI data science, because it's always domain related. And let's say you look at the domain of text mining, of reports about accidents, about 300,000 per year just in the state of Bavaria. Well, these are reports that exist already. They can be now mined and used much better. That's completely different than if you look at medical data. It's also to be handled in different ways. So if you start to see a European competitiveness layer in focusing on the domain application, not on the tool as such, not on the algorithm as such only, then you do have a domain advantage because you can do easier intertwining. If you look at some of the tech companies, you look at they're extremely good in tech. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're extremely good in the application domains where people really want to have an application. So that would be an opportunity where you can really go ahead. And in that case, then you would have different ways of regulation. You could say in the medical field, I regulate that differently than in plant predictive issues, than in Earth observatory versus human observatory.
Okay, tell us a bit more about the School of Social Science and the Technology, and tell us kind of how, what Isa said, we need to reinvent regulation. We have to kind of find new structures, kind of a learning type of regulation, how that's kind of reflected in your work.
Yeah, indeed. So TUM has gone through a big transformation process from traditional systems of faculties in the Humboldt ideal way towards schools, more following the US approach, and basically merging faculties together with the idea that so much of the innovation is happening at the intersectionalities in science and technology. Importantly, there's also been a strategic decision to add a school for social sciences and technology, as you mentioned, with the very idea, as you just outlined it, that we have to think more holistically about innovation and look at innovation not only in terms of technology advancements and science advancements, but really understand the political, economic, social, ethical, regulatory, and policy context and interactions. So it's not even the implications, it's the interactions. Technology is not just popping up, right? It's shaped by, is embedded in our social environment. And so this new school is trying to do that, is attempting to bring these perspectives together. And what's exciting about it is that it's not only a school where we have our own students at this intersection, but we are collaborating with the very large schools of engineering, design, and so forth, where you have tens of thousands of students, the future graduates who will be computer scientists and so forth, right, and engineers, and co-design their programs, and so that, you know, it's not just module 8 on ethics that we add to a course, but some sort of a more integrated understanding. What do future graduates who focus on science and technology need to know about the societal issues and how these things work together? So that's some sort of on the education side, and they can say more also about.
But I mean, what does your school say about kind of organizing regulation? I mean, what's the state of research here? How, if you had a greenfield, how would you design it?
Yeah.
I mean, big question, I know, but give us an idea.
Well, I think you mentioned agility, right? And agility has some sort of a bad reputation in many ways, so I don't like the term either. So that's why I emphasize this notion of regulatory learning. And I think many of my colleagues at our school are working on what are these mechanisms, what are some sort of the formats, the mechanics of learning, and what's the mindset that's required also of future policymakers and regulators, and what kind of interfaces and protocols do we need to put in place to foster and enable learning in the light of the transformation, change, and speed of change that you mentioned. I think that's a real shift. Because, of course, traditionally we think of regulation and law for good reasons as something that provides stability over a long period of time. That's some sort of the idea of the rule of law, right? That you have legal certainty. But for all the reasons that were highlighted already, we have to rethink that approach and need to be thoughtful, because otherwise the law will disappoint, because it doesn't serve the function anymore that is so important in a world that's attacking democratic systems and human rights and the rule of law.
Amelie, I mean, you've also been in academia and now you're in Chancellery. If you hear something like that, I mean, agile regulation, learning regulation, what thoughts does that spark? Is that possible?
I believe it's possible, yes. I come more from a constitutional law perspective originally, and so I believe in rules that are made to last, and I think that's the difficulty right now, is that we're looking at very specific regulation, and I guess the AI Act is only the start. By that I don't only mean Europe, but also worldwide. There are many discussions about what the next EU Commission should do and where it wants to maybe be more active in regulation. And our approach right now is to say we have rules, we need to implement them, but also personally I believe that these rules are, if you want them to last, they can't be too specific. And we really need to balance, or to think about how, like, what is that specific about AI that we really need another new rule, and what can we really, what are the harms or the negative effects, if we're talking about that, because that's mostly when regulation comes in, that we can actually combat with general legal frameworks. And that's a matter also of interpretation by courts. So what we haven't seen that so much so far is really the interpretation by courts that's going to come up in the next years. We had a landmark decision in Germany over the past weeks on the training on the data that is used to train AI and what it means from a copyright perspective. And I think we're going to see more of those decisions that help us interpret the law and show that we don't need another law, but we just need legal practice to actually happen. Okay.
Isa, when you still worked for Google or big tech companies in general, kind of they work closely with academia, or they're at least source of money in many cases. I just wonder how you see the role of universities like TUM in this discussion. I mean, is that important for you guys and for tech companies, and if yes, why?
I'm going to put my Google hat on now, even though I'm not speaking for them. But just going back a few months. So I think that, I mean, for us back then, and it's still true, the role of universities is absolutely essential. Not only because of the insights and the holistic perspective on challenges, problems, opportunities, but also, and I think we agreed on that without co-creation and without exchange of ideas and without thinking outside of your own maybe box of thoughts, we won't be able to innovate on the positive side and regulate in order to mitigate the risks. And just to give you one example from last year, I think it was last year, we did, my team did a pre-banking campaign in order to inform and educate citizens about the potential risks of disinformation online and potential manipulation tactics. So obviously you could think a tech company could do that by themselves. They have smart people working on that topic, but that would not, I think, lead us to the goal of really informing citizens about the risks of disinformation. So we worked very closely with fact-checking organizations, with universities, with behavioral scientists who go really deep into why people fall for disinformation, why they click on it, why they share it. And without these partners, I think the campaign would be maybe successful. But with these partners, we were able to, even after the campaign, really understand how it worked, what worked well, what didn't go well, to then maybe iterate on a next phase of the campaign. So taking now a more holistic view, I think the role of universities at this pivotal moment is key. But we should not forget we need the combination of the theoretical framework and the theoretical understanding of opportunities and risks and the implementation. And so I'm a big fan of co-creation right at the beginning. No matter which topic it is it regulation? Is it how we fight disinformation? How we safeguard our election integrity? I think the notion of co-creation is so fundamentally important because technology is evolving so quickly.
But is this, I mean, again, is this different with AI? Because, I mean, where money flows, kind of, there are conflicts of interests. But it seems to me with AI technology, I mean, you can't do it without industry, but yeah.
You can, yeah. Do you want to respond?
I'd like to respond because the role of a university is usually reduced to teaching and writing papers. I point that out in this smile in my face. But what really is happening is if you understand and if the environment, in our case in Heilbronn, these global market leaders understand that a university is also a partner in diversity, in different viewpoints, also in different generational sights on what the problems are. Once that happens, and co-creation is the perfect word for that, then there's a completely different access to the issues and to the problems, including the ethical questions, including all the safeguards and regulations that you have, but you have a larger, more vibrant community of innovators. That can bring different perspectives to bear. We usually ask our global champions, if you already failed once and then failed twice on that issue, perhaps you need to think about it differently. Mm-hmm. And here's a different perspective. Here's a fundamental research that might take a while, but it's at least an interesting question. And it's a question where somebody says, interesting. But this interaction, this kind of impact leads to also a different construction of university buildings. Mm-hmm. The new buildings will all be open at the ground floor. They will not be closed, and you can see what's happening inside, but it's open to ask questions as much as academics go out and ask questions themselves, what's the best way? And I think with that, you learn very quickly where possible regulation might be helpful, because industry asks for guidelines to be relatively clear. Here's a line where we can say we don't want to do it. And most of them have imposed similar guidelines already voluntarily on their own actions to be as responsible, as explainable, as unbiased as it gets.
Thank you. Now let's change gears. Or you said there's like lots of kind of regulatory experiments going on around the world. There's Singapore, there's Europe, of course China, the US. Kind of what is your mental kind of map of that? Kind of how do we have to think about the map of regulation when it comes to AI?
Well, a simple matrix, if you like matrix, is a country pursuing more of a self-regulatory or soft law approach where technical standards and ethical principles and things like that play a strong role. So India, Singapore are in that camp. Or is it more a hard law approach, right? Like Europe in particular, but also Brazil increasingly and Canada. And then the other dimension is essentially a country or a region pursuing a horizontal approach, essentially trying across application areas that we mentioned, from health to transportation, education, you name it, horizontally to regulate AI. Or vertically, right? So say, okay, we go one by one, a little bit what you described before, and say, no, we don't impose a horizontal law, but we go to the different sectors and upgrade existing laws, also to your point earlier on. So that's some sort of one way to structure it. And where a country lands obviously has to do enormously with the political economy. So it's no coincidence that the US is taking a very different approach to these questions, given the prominence and importance, economic importance of tech companies and the whole innovation ecosystem. And second, it's geopolitics increasingly. And with the Trump election, for sure, there's a very clear, strong focus on the competition between the US and China, and that will affect regulation as well, both within the US, but I think it will have implications also globally.
I mean, since you mentioned the US and Trump, I mean, what do you expect to happen there? We have the executive order, and Trump has said he wants to get rid of it, but we have an Elon Musk who is actually in favor of regulation, strangely. I mean, there's the conflict between Altman and Musk, OpenAI and X. So what do you expect to happen there?
It's impossible to say what's going to happen. I think we will all. It's like the next drama on Netflix. You never know what's going to happen. But I do think the one there's a great likelihood that this competition with China will be more prominent, also in legislation and in regulation, executive orders and the like. So. And that has already been fairly prominent in the debates across the political spectrum, in Congress in particular. So maybe that's some sort of the way where regulation still will happen if it's some sort of strengthening the US position in this perceived global arms race around AI. So that may be some sort of the path to get to consensus what to do next, as opposed to the principled question, should we regulate or not regulate, but rather say, well, we're in a geopolitical arms race and that needs regulation. And I think that's maybe another important reminder, right? Regulation doesn't only mean to regulate what you're not allowed to do, but quite often, especially also the executive order, outlines proactive measures to support the advancement of AI, investments in AI, skill training in AI, and the like. So, you know, not thinking about regulation just as bans, but also this kind of enabling, promoting a role. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that, given the geopolitical backdrop.
Amelie, how do you see that, what's happening in the US? I mean, do you have any expectation, and to extend that question, what does that mean for global cooperation when it comes to AI? We need it. There's some kind of the beginnings of kind of a global regulatory regime, and you mentioned those things. But yeah, what do you expect to happen in the US, and how is that going to influence global cooperation?
So what we've seen so far is that digital policy is sometimes, I mean, there are some questions in which the two parties in the US don't agree or disagree, but on a lot of things, such as like measures that are in the executive order on attracting talent, for instance, I could not see anyone wanting to ban that. We are also seeing some sort of regulatory measures in the US that now, so there is some sort of export control on AI, on data. Data should no longer be transferred to certain countries, such as Russia, China, and that's something that is quite new because, as you probably all know, there is no federal law on data privacy or data security in the US. But these are things that have been already started under the Biden administration, and that we don't think will totally change with the new administration, simply because it's very much in a US interest. Something that we've been doing at the EU level for the past 5 years is a Trade and Technology Council, and I'm afraid that I mean, we don't know yet, but I don't think that that's something that the Trump administration will want to continue. So that's something where probably the dialogue will be interrupted in many questions. I'm also not sure that the new administration will have the same priorities when it comes to, as we mentioned in the very early question, sort of like the immediate risk for everyone, and also a very human-centered human-centered AI policies. So I'm not sure that's going to go there. The other thing that is maybe less obvious is that it might be that under the new administration, the US will reduce their funding of international organizations, and that when you think about the work the OECD has been doing on AI, for instance, we don't know that yet, but it might be something to worry about if, the US cuts the funding by a certain amount, because then this important work will no longer be done. And we probably all remember how the last Trump administration, their position on the UN and on funding certain programs in the UN. So follow the money. I'm not sure, that could have quite an impact, I believe.
Well, you mentioned OECD, Hiroshima process, AI Safety Institutes, there was a meeting, I think last week in San Francisco. All these efforts, do you think they're going to move ahead, or is that also kind of like the Paris Accords, that's dead? Or is it, again, too early to say?
I think it's too early to say. Yeah. The G7 has always had a very prominent position in this area, and what the Hiroshima process made, like this code of conduct, it's soft law, it's nothing that is super binding. We'll see. Also, the whole setup in the US is unclear for now. Will they continue on that path, and are they interested in building a policy network? What we have, my senses of this meeting, this first meeting of AI Safety Institute, was that it was very focused on technical expertise. And on a positive note, maybe this dialogue on technical expertise will continue because it's in everyone's interest. I'm not sure that the policy dialogue will be as close as it was right now.
Isa, what do you expect in that realm? Well, let's put it this way. Ideally, what would you like to see happen, kind of?
Turn back time to before Wednesday, but that's impossible. I would completely agree with your view. I think from a US perspective, the economy and how the new administration will support the economy will be the key factor also when it comes to technology and AI. What I would wish for is that Europe sees that now as the moment of uncertainty, sees that as a moment to focus maybe on three things. One, knowing, which is power in the end, so educating ourselves and everyone who's in political, academic, economic roles, educating ourselves on the risks and the opportunities of AI, collaborating and co-creating opportunities, and third, really understanding that only with innovation, and that comes along with investments, we will be able to see progress. If we're not investing in innovation that is based on co-creation, that is based on regulatory frameworks that also enhance and support innovation, we will probably have a big problem. Not only because we are already maybe 1 step behind, 4 steps behind the US and China, but also because our democracies are attacked as well from the inside and from the outside. So I think this is really, and I said it before, it's a pivotal moment for Europe and for everyone who cares about the sovereignty and the resilience in democracies in Europe to really step up and to think really ahead. What is the future that we envision in Europe when we not know what is going to happen with the new administration in the US, and obviously seeing China really moving fast forward?
One more future-oriented question before I open it up to the audience. Do you expect that there will be in 2 or 3 years kind of the beginnings of a global regulatory regime when it comes to AI? Or is this just not possible given given what's happening?
I think it's not going to happen anytime soon. I would agree that there may be zones of convergence when it comes to technical standards and particularly safety requirements. I think that's most likely. But given the overall political fragmentation we see and the disagreements around values, I would be very surprised if you would do some magic trick and suddenly have a global AI governance regime popping up.
Cool, thank you. Questions from the audience? Yeah. And I think there's a mic somewhere.
Oh.
But, okay. Yeah, so Stefanie Urks, Hochschule München, doing my PhD right now at LMU. I've got a question. So what we see, hear, and read makes our reality. So all the values embedded in Gen AI nudge us into a certain direction because we are using it every day in our lives. But who is responsible what is in Gen AI? Momentarily, it's companies. So I think there need to be regulations about what kind of values we got in Gen AI. Do you think that we, with our local regulation, are able to regulate such an international system? And are we even able to have an international value system? Or are we just telling people, your values, your way of life is worse than ours?
Who wants to take that?
Since I didn't have so many, well, I'll take it on because I think it's about the question what, let's say, the German population expects, and I can give you a few insights recently published. 80% of the German citizens think they know AI, 28% think they can explain it, 23% overestimate it. That seems decent. 11% says all the time, 30% never ever, and the 75% says we want to use it if there is enough responsibility, it's not biased, it's explainable, and these are the main things. So we have to make sure that these measures are implemented in the actual tools that you use. The higher up we ask the question, like on a global level, Earth without Mars, the more difficult it gets to fulfill the citizens' wishes. And they tell us, about 78%, we don't think that the state, our democracy, can handle the issues coming up. So my worry is much more along your lines. What happens if we do not fulfill the utilization of consumer available technology in a decent way? And I'll explain decent in a minute. So it really impacts on today's life, not worrying about who will have the next foundation model, large language model. And I think there are a few ways on a European scale where you can actually bring these technologies to bear for the use cases in the middle ground, not on the fringes, but in the middle ground where it actually helps in Fachkräftemangel and not enough talents to work in public administration in this year, next year, in the future. And I think that's where we really ought to focus on using the technology for that, while at the same time worry about the larger language models, European sovereignty, and all the other things, because that is not opposing each other. But if we just focus on the lovely global debate, well, then we get stuck even more because we haven't done anything for a while, because it's so nice that you talk about the global debate.
Cool. Next question behind you.
Sorry, not for us.
So my name is Khaled Mahmoud. So I'm basically industrial economist and econometrician in Berlin and startup ecosystem advisor. So having heard your discussion and the way I have read international literature, I find recently we had a Berlin Global Dialogue at ESMT, where President Macron made a very good statement that we in Europe and Germany are over-regulating and underestimating. So if I follow this underestimating segment, as you said, that Europe seems to have lost competition, but I not fully agree to that, because look, 4 weeks ago, India, who is the third largest unicorn country and startup ecosystem, have announced to develop their own foundation models using their local languages and all these kind of things, you know. So why cannot Europe or Germany think to diversify, because these foundation models are based on natural language? Maybe you should shift also to scientific and other areas as well. This is one point. And second, sir, your point is also very important, because I'm practically engaged in Berlin using domain-specific models, because I started using ChatGPT and found that there's a hallucination problem, each time different and never come to, So then I started using RAG technology and then, okay. But again, in this segment, you are also facing severe competition from US SaaS companies in Germany. So I have also connection with them. So we should think, how can we become more competitive,
Isa, why don't you take that?
So I talked about the competitiveness of Europe in specific, and I would still say that from a technological point of view and from the development point of view, we're not competing. We are falling behind, and that might be true to the regulation that we have and to the complexity for an AI startup to build their own large language model, because they have to apply and comply with the regulation. And I truly believe that now is the time to really rethink our approach to technological development and to new innovation. But that can only go along with more investment and with more collaboration from the different spheres, from the academic sphere, from the economic sphere, and obviously from within the startup ecosystem that is very vibrant in Europe. And let's hope that we find a way to have AI-powered unicorns in the next couple of years. But again, I would say that it is a crossroad moment to really shift the mindset to something that we are not used to. So we are used to see the big tech innovation coming from the US. I don't think it makes sense to try and copy the Silicon Valley. I think it makes more sense to think about what kind of technology do we want to build, and how can we base that on the fundamental values that we all agree on within Europe. And I think that's a uniqueness that stands out in comparison to the US and to China.
That's a great last word. Sorry, we're out of time, but I have one more question, because the organizer asked me to ask the tear down the wall question. The tear down the wall question here is, what do we need to do to tear down the wall that keeps us from building a reliable or robust international regime to regulate AI? In 3 words or 4.
An international regime.
Yeah.
Maybe we would probably need less other crises that we need to handle. We would need stability in general, and so I think, and we need, and that's something I wanted to refer to in the Draghi report. It shows it's not that much only about regulation; it's about we need investment, and we find that we need to stop the fragmentation in the European market. So that's not international, but I think it's the way ahead.
Similar spirit, we have to bring back in human intelligence and use it wisely.
That's probably the toughest question. I would say we need access to knowledge so that everyone can understand the times that we're living in from a technological perspective. I think the knowledge that we have on AI is very much comprised in elite groups. Finland, for me, is always the best example. They started to offer AI essential courses 5 years ago. So making societies more ready for the future. And for me, education is a key.
Great.
I'd like to break down the wall between the valley of complaints and cross over to the valley of doing things.
Very good. Thank you very much.